on Aurora Airways Flight 982 to Denver. A black man wearing a gray hoodie and simple jeans sat quietly in seat 1A, first class. He said nothing, just placed his old leather briefcase beside him. But it was that simplicity that caused everything to start to slip out of orbit. The flight attendant walked over, smiling politely, but her eyes held a hint of doubt. "Sorry, this area's for first class only. You might be sitting in the wrong seat." That seemingly innocuous remark set off a storm bigger than they could have imagined. Just 45 minutes later, the entire airline was in chaos. Phones were ringing, social media was ablaze, and the despised man, Jordan Blake, turned out to be the one who held the power to decide the fate of Aurora Airways. What happened in first class that day? And how did one wrong word change the way the system treated people? If you believe that justice does not need shouting, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to join us in the story. Black CEO denied first class seat. 45 minutes later. Airline in chaos. On Aurora Airways Flight 982 to Denver. The atmosphere in the first class cabin was quiet, as if everything had been neatly arranged. Yellow lights softly illuminated the brown leather seat, and the smell of Arabica coffee mixed with the scent of luxurious perfume wafted through the air. In the middle of the first row of seats, a black man around 40 years old sat silently. Jordan Blake, gray hoodie, dark jeans, old leather briefcase placed neatly at his feet. He opened a small notebook, wrote a few short lines, then closed it, his eyes calm, as if there was nothing remarkable. But that very normality makes some people uneasy. From the back of the cabin, flight attendant Olivia Carter stepped forward. She was tall, with neatly tied blonde hair and a professional face, the kind of person who always believed she was right. Olivia stopped right next to seat 1A, looked down at Jordan for a moment, and spoke in a polite but cold voice. "Sorry. This compartment is for first class only. Maybe I'm in the wrong seat." Jordan looked up. A small smile crossed his face as he held out the boarding pass to her. "First class. Seat 1A. Olivia glanced over. Her eyes paused for half a second, then became cautious. "I will check the system again." Her words caused a few passengers to turn and look. An elderly woman in row 1B raised her eyebrows slightly. A man in row 2A, Mr. Leonard Briggs, sneered and whispered loud enough for someone to hear. He must have gotten lost. He probably had an economy ticket and didn't know it. Jordan said nothing. He just looked out the window, where the plane's wings were fogging up. Olivia turned back to a colleague, Mia Lopez, and began whispering inspections. They both glanced at Jordan as if assessing whether he was suitable for the chair he was sitting in. "Maybe the system makes a mistake," Olivia said. "Sometimes people who aren't used to booking tickets or choose the wrong cabin." Jordan heard clearly, but he remained silent. His hands slowly fastened his seatbelt, his eyes unwavering. A small beep sounded, the familiar sound of a video camera phone. In the back seat, a young man was live streaming on Twitter. The text read, "I ain't jet watcher. A black passenger is suspected of being seated in the wrong first-class seat on Aurora 982 of Aurora Airways. Bias in the sky." It all happened in just a few minutes, but the atmosphere in the cabin felt frozen. Olivia turned back, her expression hardening. "Can you show me your ID? We need more verification." Jordan handed over her wallet, ID card, and boarding pass. Everything matched Jordan Blake, Aurora Airways First Class, Seat 1A. She still felt uneasy. "Sorry. It's just procedure," she said. But her voice lacked the confidence that procedure required. A throat clearing came from row 2A. "Mr. Briggs interjected again, "Ma'am. Let the flight take off." If he doesn't cooperate, call security. Some people nodded, others filmed. Jordan remained seated, eyes looking straight ahead, voice steady. I'm cooperating. I just want to sit in the seat I paid for. The words were as light as a breath, but they left Olivia slightly confused. She left, speaking softly into the walkie-talkie. Just a few minutes later, Captain Daniel Hughes, the captain, with a sturdy build and gray hair, stepped out of the cockpit. What's the problem here? Olivia quickly said. This passenger is attempting to occupy a first-class seat, sir. The captain looked at Jordan, his cold gaze sliding from his sneakers to his hoodie. Are you trying to get an unauthorized upgrade? This is first class, not a place to push your luck. The atmosphere in the cabin dropped. Heads turned, and several raised their cameras higher. Jordan looked at him, his voice still calm. Sir, I have a ticket. You can check it in the system. Captain Hughes folded his arms. If you don't cooperate, I'll call security. Jordan let out a soft breath, took out his phone, and turned on the front camera. He spoke clearly, without shaking or anger. Time 9:14 a.m. Aurora Airways Flight 982 Seat 1A. I am being removed from a seat I paid for. Each word echoed slowly, coldly, as if he were recording each frame of justice. Olivia signaled security. 2 officers, Officer Kevin Brooks and Officer Emily Park, boarded the plane. One checked the system at the door. After a few seconds, he raised his head and spoke clearly. Correct boarding pass, first-class ticket, seat 1A, purchased 3 weeks ago. The air suddenly became heavy. Olivia stiffened, then spoke quickly, trying to maintain control. He definitely found a way to beat the system. Those people. The 2 words rang out clearer than any engine noise. Jordan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The others who had been taking it for granted turned to Olivia. Some shook their heads. Some started taking close-up videos of her. Officer Brooks recommends, sir. We can ask you to come down to gate C14 for further verification. It will only take a few minutes. Jordan nodded. Okay, if you follow the procedure, I have no reason to refuse. He stood up, picked up his briefcase, and walked slowly down the aisle. No one said anything, but something in the air seemed to have changed. Something heavier than prejudice, the silence of the onlookers. On the screen at gate C14, the words flashed. Aurora Airways 982. Delayed 23 minutes. No one in the cabin knew that the delay was about to open an unprecedented confrontation between dignity and privilege. And in just 45 minutes, an entire airline would have to bow down to the man they once suspected. As Jordan stepped out of first class, all eyes followed him, not because he was asked to leave, but because they had a feeling the man would not leave quietly. The air in the cabin thickened, like a thick fog. Olivia stood still for a moment, then turned away quickly, her voice coming through the radio, calm but still angry. Mia, come here for a moment. I need you to testify for something. From the galley, Mia Lopez, the flight attendant, stepped out. She was younger, her face more likable, but her eyes still held a hint of shyness, like someone trying to appear professional in front of a longtime colleague. What's going on? Mia asked. Olivia pointed to Jordan, who was talking to security, said he had a first-class ticket, but he looked, Mia glanced over. Jordan was standing still, his hands in the pockets of his hoodie, looking strangely composed. She hesitated, then nodded slightly, silently supporting her colleague. Olivia lowered her voice, but loud enough for others to hear. Maybe he booked an economy ticket without knowing it. The system is very confusing these days, especially for people who are not familiar with how to book. It was a small remark, but it was enough to stir up a murmur around the cabin. A few passengers raised their eyebrows, and a few others turned their phones toward Jordan. In row 2A, Mr. P. Leonard Briggs, a middle-aged white man in a neat suit, cleared his throat loudly. "Come back to your place, my friend. Don't delay the whole trip over a little thing. We have to go to Denver." There was no swearing, no outright insult in that statement, but it carried a layer of authority, the right to command, simply because he believed he had a reason to be superior. Jordan turned back. His eyes met Briggs's, not angry, not afraid, just a silence that made the other person step back slightly. "I'm not causing any trouble, sir. I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for." Briggs smiled faintly. "You argue with everything people say. You don't look like someone who flies first class." Mia turned away, avoiding Jordan's gaze. Olivia crossed her arms, waiting for him to react. But he didn't. He just bent down, opened his briefcase, and took out a card. This. The Aurora Airways Platinum card reflected the cabin lights, shining like metal hidden under a layer of time dust. Jordan placed it on the table between the 2 rows of seats. His voice calmed Platinum membership. 6 years in a row. Mia frowned slightly. 6 years, that wasn't everyone's number. Olivia glanced over, but kept her disdain. "Anyone can print this card online now. I've seen dozens of fakes." The words fell, cold as steel. Briggs chuckled, and a few people behind him murmured. A young man in the back row raised his phone higher. The lens pointed directly at Olivia. He whispered into the mic, his voice clear. "This is Aurora 982 to Denver. Black passenger suspected of being in the wrong first-class seat. All paperwork is in order, but flight attendant still doesn't believe it. #Aurora bias. You're watching live on a jet watcher." A blink of an eye, and the world outside the cabin began to take notice. Each click, each comment, like a pebble thrown into a pond, spread endlessly. Jordan still said nothing. He stood there, looking at Olivia, then around. His face was expressionless, but his eyes held a quiet disappointment. A disappointment directed not at an individual, but at the system. A middle-aged woman in the back row whispered, "Unbelievable. People still do this." Olivia heard it, but tried to ignore it. She turned to Mia Call Security again. "I don't want this to drag on." Mia hesitated. "But the result just now? The system confirmed that he was right." "Right, I told you. The system could be wrong. I take responsibility." Her voice was sharp, like an order. Jordan nodded slightly and put the platinum card away. "I see," he said softly. "Sometimes the most unbelievable thing is the truth." Mia looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something in Jordan's eyes that made her flinch, a calm she hadn't seen before. She didn't know if she was witnessing a fight or a moment where history was about to be rewritten. On a jet watcher's phone screen, the viewership skyrocketed. The comments started pouring in. "I can't believe this is still happening in 2025. He's acting so calm." Olivia Carter, remember that name. Olivia realized everything was being recorded, but it was too late. She clenched her fists, turning her back to the camera. Jordan turned slightly and sat down on a chair near the door. He pulled out his phone, opened his notes app, and typed a few short lines. No one could tell what he wrote, but when he looked up, his eyes were different. No longer one who suffered, but one who watched. In the distance, the airport loudspeakers announced that the flight was delayed by a few minutes But inside the cabin, time seemed to stand still. Everyone waited to see what the man would do. A moment of silence passed. Then Jordan spoke, very softly, but loud enough for the three closest people to hear. Justice does not need shouting. It only needs evidence. Mia looked at him strangely. Briggs frowned slightly, and Olivia looked away. Outside, one jet watcher updated his status. The man remained calm, not shouting, not arguing. There was something in his eyes that silenced the whole compartment. Those words would soon be shared thousands of times, but right now, in that small cabin, only 3 people understood. Something had just spun out of control. Mia leaned down and whispered to Olivia, "Are you sure you want to continue? I'm following the rules. Or is it how you feel?" Olivia turned, eyes blazing, but she didn't answer. Jordan stood up, wordlessly, and walked toward the door. Not away, but as if he were letting the truth walk out on its own. In the back compartment, a young man whispered, "If he were a normal person, they wouldn't be so scared." As Jordan left the cabin, no one said a word. But in that silence, something began to crack. Not just the airline's reputation, but the veneer of confidence that people felt they had the right to judge by their looks. Footsteps sounded from the front of the cabin. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Daniel Hughes appeared. He was in his 50s, tall and erect, with a stern, old-school military face. A silver watch gleamed on his wrist, and his voice was as firm as a command on the training ground. "What's going on here?" Olivia immediately straightened up, as if empowered. "Captain, this passenger is trying to take a first-class seat. I checked, but he won't leave." Captain Hughes glanced at Jordan. The glance was quick, cold, and judgmental, as if he needed only a second to make up his mind. Jordan stood there, silent, his hands clasped before him. He did not argue, did not defend himself. "You're trying to get an unauthorized upgrade, aren't you?" The captain's voice was steady, with no doubt in his judgment. Jordan frowned slightly. "No, sir. I just sat in the seat I had booked. First class. Seat 1A. The captain took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. The nod of someone who has made up his mind before even listening. "If you don't cooperate, I'll call ground security." Olivia looked over, her eyes filled with satisfaction. She thought everything was resolved. Some passengers started shaking their heads. Others looked down, pretending not to be involved. But Jordan took out his phone again. Not to call, but to record. The screen lit up. He raised the camera to eye level, his voice clear, not shaky, not raised. "It's 9:18 a.m. Aurora Airways Flight 982 to Denver. I'm being forced out of my paid-for first-class seat." The sound in the cabin suddenly quieted, as if everyone held their breath. The way he spoke slow, precise, without a trace of anger, made even Olivia feel a little awkward. "What are you filming?" she asked, her voice higher than usual. Jordan lowered the camera, his eyes calm. "I just want to leave the truth behind, in case someone's memory chooses to forget." A woman in the back row covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. Briggs looked over, opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. "Captain Hughes Qui," sang Olivia Calls Security. "I don't have time for this." Olivia nodded and walked quickly toward the door. Less than 2 minutes later, 2 airport security officers entered the cabin. Officer Kevin Brooks and Officer Emily Park. Brooks was tall, dark, with the matter-of-fact look of someone used to airport trouble. Emily Park was younger, of Korean descent, petite, with delicate, cautious eyes. They approached. Brooks spoke first, his voice calm. "Sir, we just need to verify some information. Your ticket and ID, please." Jordan handed it over without hesitation. Brooks scanned the ticket, frowning. He double-checked it on his handheld. Then he looked up, staring at the captain. "Valid ticket, first class, seat 1A, purchased 3 weeks ago, paid in full." A second of silence. 2 seconds. The whole cabin froze. Olivia forced a smile, trying to stay calm. Maybe he found a way to beat the system. Those people can. Those people. 3 simple words fell, heavier than the sound of the Boeing engine outside the window. Jordan didn't speak, but Officer Emily looked at Olivia. Her eyes slow, like someone who had just heard something unacceptable. Brooks hung up, letting out a soft breath. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the data matches perfectly. There are no errors." Captain Hughes looked at Olivia, then at Jordan, but neither of them would back down. "Anyway," Hughes said, "we can't take off if there's a dispute. Please come down to gate C14 for further clarification. We don't want to make a big deal out of it." Jordan looked up. His eyes held no anger, only a faint sadness. "I understand. I will go. But don't call this a misunderstanding. Call it what it is." He picked up his briefcase and walked down the aisle. Olivia avoided his gaze. Briggs watched, half remorseful, half confused. My jet watcher's camera is still rolling. New text appears on the screen. Aurora Airways, pilots back flight attendants, despite passenger ticket being valid. Aurora bias. Justice in the sky. More than 10,000 people are watching live. The number is still growing. Jordan stopped at the door and turned. He didn't say anything to Olivia or look at Briggs. He just looked straight at the captain. "Thanks for confirming who is in control of this plane, sir. But no one is in control of the truth," he said and left. There was silence in the cabin, a heavy silence, one that made everyone feel somehow involved. Olivia looked down, her chest heaving. She didn't know why her hands were shaking so much. Captain Hughes walked back to the cockpit, but his expression was no longer as stoic as before. He was both confident and uncertain, that strange feeling of someone who knows he might have just made a mistake that the whole world will see. Outside, Jordan walked the airport corridor, white light reflecting off the floor. He didn't look at his phone, didn't check the video. He just knew that somewhere out there, justice was beginning to move. No screaming, no threats. All it takes is a video, and a man calm enough to hold the camera steady. When Jordan was invited down to gate C14, no one knew that moment would be the starting point of an incident that would shake the entire Aurora Airways system, where a man despised would force the powerful to confront him. Jordan walked between 2 security guards. He wasn't handcuffed or escorted, but the way everyone watched him, a mix of curiosity, concern, and apprehension, made the airport hallway seem longer than usual. The announcement echoed overhead. Flight 982 to Denver will depart 23 minutes late. At gate C14, the air was thick. A few passengers exiting the plane stood curiously nearby, their phones still held high. The line of people moved, but no one really left. They wanted to see the next part of the story they were unwilling spectators of. Officer Kevin Brooks opened the machine and checked the ticket code. The light from the screen reflected on his face. After a few seconds, he exhaled, his voice clear and slow, as if he wanted everyone to hear first-class ticket. Seat 1A, purchased 3 weeks ago, paid in full. He turned to look at Jordan, nodding slightly. "Everything is in order, sir." But Olivia stood there, her lips pressed together. She shook her head, almost blurting out the familiar words, which she herself did not realize were so poisonous. He found a way to beat the system. Those people can. Those people. Those three words fell, causing the atmosphere to suddenly fall silent. An elderly couple near the window looked up. A young man filming a live stream stopped and zoomed in on the flight attendant's face. Jordan looked straight at Olivia. His eyes weren't angry, just sad. A quiet sadness, as if he'd heard it many times in his life, yet each time hurt as much as the first. Officer Emily Park frowned slightly, glanced at Olivia, then whispered to Brooks, "I think we should go through the process. No personal comments." Brooks nodded. His voice calm, "Sir. To avoid conflict, we invite you to the ground area for further verification. We will ensure you are respected throughout the process." Jordan nodded. "I agree. If the truth needs further proof, I will help clarify it." He took his briefcase and walked with two security guards out of door C-14. There was no resistance, no shouting, just silence. A silence that made everyone bow their heads. Jet Watcher's camera is still watching. Status update. Black passenger dragged from first class despite valid ticket. Aurora 982, 23 Mayan delay. Aurora bias, or justice in progress. Views were rising rapidly. Hundreds of comments poured in every second. Behind the counter, a woman in a black suit approached. Her name tag read Linda Harper, ground supervisor. She was in her mid-40s, her face stiff with command. "Good morning. This is Linda Harper, ground supervisor for Aurora Airways. The crew reports that you caused a disturbance, causing a 23-minute delay." She paused, her voice cold, each word clear. "We have two options for you. One, you could go down to economy class and continue your flight. Two, you can leave the flight and move to the next one." Jordan looked at her, his eyes calm. "How do I mess up?" Linda crossed her arms, responding with a wry smile. "By refusing to cooperate with the crew." "Crew," Jordan repeated, his voice light as a breeze. "Are you sure that's the real reason?" She avoided, looked busy, and said quickly, "You should choose soon. The whole plane is waiting." Jordan looked around. The passengers were still standing there, phones raised, but no one intervened. It was as if they were watching a play, and he, the black man in the gray hoodie, was the reluctant lead. He turned to Officer Brooks, his voice steady. "I was cooperative. I just wanted to sit in a seat I paid for. If I messed up, that would be a whole new definition of calm." Brooks was silent. Emily Park bowed her head slightly, as if embarrassed for someone. Linda spoke again, this time more sharply. "You should understand. The airline reserves the right to refuse passengers if they feel they are unsuitable. We are trying to keep things under control." Jordan nodded, as if taking in every word. "I understand. Then please repeat that on camera." He raised his phone. The light from the screen fell on Linda's face. She stepped back slightly, her voice faltering. "Are you threatening me?" "No. I'm just documenting how Aurora Airways chooses to treat its customers." Silence. Only the sound of the ceiling fan and the confused looks of the crowd. A silver-haired woman standing near the window whispered, "He didn't raise his voice." "Why are they pushing him?" Jordan turned, smiled gratefully, and said softly, "Sometimes people don't need to shout. They just need to believe they have the right." Linda was growing impatient. She looked at her watch, then at Officer Brooks. "I don't have time. If he doesn't agree, we cancel the ticket and move him out." Brooks was about to say something, but Jordan raised his hand slightly. "It's okay. I'll go." but write it down on the report I left when my ticket was valid. And it wasn't my fault. He walked slowly toward the waiting area. The whole airport was silent. People were looking at him not just out of curiosity, but because there was something about the way he walked, calm, head unbowed, that made them unable to look away. Linda signaled for the clerk to close the file. But as she signed, the phone in her pocket vibrated. A notification from Aurora's internal staff. The Aurora 982 incident is spreading. Request to temporarily hold the flight, pending instructions from headquarters. She frowned. In a few seconds, the manager's cold face disappeared, replaced by a vague worry. She looked out the glass door, where the black man sat silently, his hands on his knees, staring into the empty space in front of him. No one said anything to anyone, but everyone knew the storm was coming. And this time, it was not in the cabin of an airplane. It was in the heart of a system that had become too accustomed to trusting the wrong people and suspecting the wrong people. When ground manager Linda Harper showed up, everyone thought she would put the problem out. But it only took a few minutes for it to become clear her handling of the situation would cause the fire to flare up and spread beyond the airport, far beyond Aurora Airways' expectations. The atmosphere at Gate C-14 was as heavy as if something were about to break. Linda stood straight, her voice stiff, trying to maintain control through attitude rather than reason. Jordan sat still, his hands on his knees, his posture strangely composed, but his eyes, deep and still as a lake, seemed to reflect everything around him, from Brooks's confusion to the tension in Olivia's eyes standing in the distance. A woman in a white blouse stepped out of the first-class cabin. She was about 40, tall, with a face marked by experience. Her name tag read Dr. Helen Cooper, emergency physician. She walked slowly toward Linda, her voice clear and firm, but devoid of emotion. "Excuse me. I was the passenger in seat 1B. I saw everything. He wasn't causing any trouble. He had all his paperwork." He responded politely. "The problem is, your flight attendant didn't bother to check the system. The whole area seemed to stop." Linda turned, slightly startled. "Madam, this is an internal matter between the airline and the passenger. Please do not interfere." Dr. Cooper frowned, his voice stern, as if he were talking to a medical student who had made a mistake in the operating room. "I didn't intervene. I testified, because if someone asked me, I would tell them exactly what I saw. A black passenger was asked to leave his paid seat just because he didn't look like the person who should be sitting there." The words fell, crisp and sharp as a knife cutting through the air. Linda tried to smile, but the corners of her lips were stiff. Just then, another man walked out, gray suit, blue tie, laptop still in hand. "I'm Alan Wright, sitting in row 1C, he said, his voice low and firm. "I confirm, Dr. Cooper's words. He wasn't causing trouble. He was just treated disrespectfully. I think the airline should look at how they handled it rather than blame the passengers." Linda swallowed and looked around, as if searching for an ally. But Olivia was silent, her eyes on the floor. Mia Lopez, who had been hesitant, now stood firmly on Dr. Cooper's side. A ping sound came from someone's phone, then another, then two. The person filming whispered, "The hashtag, #Aurora Airways discrimination is trending." On O's JetWatcher's screen, the status line update's witnesses emerged. A white doctor and a businessman confirmed that the black passenger was absolutely right. Viewers grew rapidly. Over 90,000 people were watching live. Linda turned to another ground staff member, her voice low but urgent. "Turn off the camera. no recording. But it was no use. No one was listening. Instead, dozens of phones were raised higher, as if the whole world were looking down from their screens. Jordan still didn't speak. He sat up straight, his eyes so calm that it made others feel uncomfortable. "Doctor." Cooper approached and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You don't need to say anything. The truth speaks for itself." Jordan smiled and nodded his thanks. "Thank you. But I believe people only listen when what they believe is challenged with their own eyes." A sigh came from behind. Briggs, the man in seat 2A, leaned against the wall, no longer looking as disdainful as before. He spoke in a low but clear voice. "I saw that too. Maybe. I was wrong to tell you to go to the back compartment." Linda bit her lip. Things were getting out of control. She tried to brace herself. "Please keep quiet. We will handle this according to company procedure." "Doctor." Cooper turned back and looked at her straight. "If your process results in a passenger being pulled from his or her rightful seat simply because of the color of his or her skin, then perhaps that process is the problem." Those words made a few people clap softly, not loudly, but enough for Linda to understand the initiative had changed. While she was trying to call the operator, Brooks approached Jordan, his voice low but sincere. "I apologize, sir. I was only following orders, but now I see something is wrong. I will make it clear in my report that you did not violate anything." Jordan nodded slightly. "Thank you. I know. Sometimes people just do their part, but it's those small parts that make up the big system." Emily Park stood nearby, listening to every word. She bowed her head, as if he had just hit upon something she had been trying to avoid thinking about. In the distance, the electronic screen added a new line. "Aurora Airways 982, delayed 45 minutes. No one complained. Everyone knew that this flight was no longer about taking off or not. It was a measure of the dignity of an entire airline." Linda put down the phone, her face pale. She had just received a message from headquarters. "Case C-14 is being monitored directly, waiting for instructions." She looked around, realizing that no one was listening to her. Jordan stood up and picked up his briefcase. The light fell on his face. Calm, but determined. "I don't want anyone to lose their job. I just want the right thing to be seen as the right thing. But it seems that's harder than I thought. Doctor." Cooper looked at him, his eyes filled with both admiration and concern. "There are people who remind us that silence has its own power." Jordan smiled and replied softly, "Yes, but sometimes silence needs to be recorded, so it doesn't get buried with the truth." He turned and walked away. The crowd parted. Someone was tapping on a keyboard, a freelancer typing the first line of a story, when a passenger stays calmer than the airline. And so, from gate C-14, the story began to spread. No longer he caused trouble, but how did they treat a calm person? While Linda tried to calm everyone down, Jordan sat still, opened his phone and dialed a familiar number. His voice was low and decisive, not loud, but it echoed clearly in the noisy space of the airport. "Start the meeting in conference room A. Now. Just 6 words. No explanation. No need to add more." He hung up, put the phone down. A few people heard, but didn't understand. Dr. Helen Cooper, still standing nearby, tilted her head slightly and asked softly, "You said—" "A council meeting. A normal passenger has a council meeting right now." Jordan did not answer immediately. He opened his briefcase, took out a small black leather box, gently opened the lid, pulled out a business card, and handed it to Linda Harper, the ground manager who was trying to make an urgent call to her superiors. Linda took it, a little surprised. She quickly read the embossed text on the minimalist white background: Jordan Blake, Chief Executive Officer, Blake Global Holdings. The light from the electronic board above reflected off the business card, making the words Chief Executive Officer shine brightly among the stunned crowd. Dr. Cooper looked at Linda, then at Jordan, repeating as if to confirm what he had just seen. You are? The CEO of Blake Global. Jordan smiled and nodded. Yes. Perhaps Ms. Harper's firm knows us. Blake Global Holdings just completed a 23% stake in Aurora Airways in April. Linda stood there, frozen. A chill ran down her spine. She turned the card over as if she couldn't believe her eyes. No way. 23% immediately. A few passengers opened their phones and searched Google. Within seconds, the first results appeared. Blake Global Holdings buys 23% stake in Aurora Airways, becoming second largest shareholder, behind only Echelon Capital. Jordan Blake's investment group expands into aviation. A young man cried out, "Oh my God!" They just dragged one of the owners of the airline off the plane. Olivia Carter, who was standing in the hallway nearby, felt her face drain away. She turned away, but everyone's eyes were on her. Captain Daniel Hughes, the captain, walked quickly out of the cockpit, his face grimacing. What's the matter? Linda gave him her business card, her voice trembling slightly. He is Jordan Blake, CEO of Blake Global Holdings. Hughes took it, his eyes fixed on the words. He looked up at the black man before him, the man he had ordered to leave the compartment less than half an hour ago. Mr. Blake, Jordan interrupted, his voice low, but not harsh. No need to explain. Captain, I understand how prejudice works. It's faster than reason. The whole area fell silent. Linda swallowed, trying to regain her professional voice. Mr. Blake, I really don't know. If we knew who you were. A shareholder. Jordan raised his eyebrows slightly. So if I wasn't, would you still be acting like that? Linda was silent. No one could say anything more. Behind him, Dr. Cooper looked at him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. You know, you could have blown everything up if you had reacted differently, but you chose to stay silent. Jordan smiled softly. Silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it is a way to make others listen to themselves. The word, short and concise, seemed to sink into everyone's minds. No one was holding their phones to film anymore. They were really looking, really listening. Captain Hughes stepped back, his eyes troubled. He whispered to Linda, call headquarters right away. The CEO will want to know about this. But Jordan spoke first. He took out his phone, dialed quickly, and spoke evenly. Evelyn, this is Jordan. There's a little problem at the airport. I think Aurora needs a 5-minute emergency meeting. Call the control channel. Linda recognized the name. Evelyn Grant, CEO of Aurora Airways. She paled and took a half step back. In her mind, all the procedures, all the little power she had been accustomed to using to control passengers, suddenly became meaningless. In the distance, on the JetWatcher screen, a new update appears. Passenger kicked out of first class turns out to be CEO of corporation that owns 23% of Aurora Airways. Aurora crisis, Jordan Blake. Over 250,000 people are watching live. Comments are flooding in. This is no longer about passengers being insulted. This is a slap in the face to the system. Justice does not need shouting. It needs the truth. Linda looked at Jordan, her voice weak. Mr. Blake, I'm really sorry. Jordan looked at her, his eyes not cold, just sad. "I believe you didn't mean it, but unintentionally is enough to hurt someone, and today, that very unintentional thing has made the whole company have to reflect on itself. Doctor—" Cooper looked around, his voice low. "Perhaps, for the first time, they will have to learn to look at people before they look at plane tickets." Jordan nodded slightly, taking the business card back from Linda's hand. "Keep it. You may need to call me, not to apologize, but to cooperate in the new training program. Aurora needs that." Linda couldn't say anything. She just bowed her head. It had all happened so fast. The person who had been suspected, who had been removed from first class, was now the one who had brought the whole system to a halt. "Doctor," Cooper exhaled and said softly to Alan Wright, "I think we just witnessed what people call justice, but without a court." Alan nodded slightly, and no need to scream. Jordan turned to the window and looked out at the planes parked on the runway. The light reflected off the glass, casting a pale halo around him. He said nothing more, but everyone understood. From that moment on, the power had changed. He said nothing more, but everyone understood. From that moment, the power had changed. Jordan turned and looked straight at Linda Harper, who was still hovering between shock and fear. His voice was low and even, not threatening, but had a weight that no one dared to interrupt. "In about 3 minutes, you'll get a call from headquarters. So listen." Linda started slightly. She looked at her watch, then at the phone in her hand, as if doubting what she had just heard. "What do you mean?" Jordan smiled slightly. "It's nothing big. I just talked to the council." The atmosphere at Gate C-14 froze. A few people exchanged glances, their eyes filled with suspicion and curiosity. "Doctor." Helen Cooper tilted her head slightly, smiling discreetly. Alan Wright clasped his hands behind his back, as if preparing to watch a performance whose climax he knew was coming. Those 3 minutes, longer than any flight. Each second felt like a breathless count. Then the phone in Linda's hand rang. Aurora's internal ringtone, a cold, monotonous sound, suddenly rang out like a wake-up call. Linda looked at the screen. HQ, Ms. Evelyn Grant. She swallowed and pressed the answer button. "Supervisor Harper Inge." The female voice on the other end of the line rang out, sharp and decisive. "Linda, this is Evelyn Grant. Let me speak to Mr. Blake. Immediately." Linda stiffened. She glanced at Jordan, her lips trembling slightly. The whole area fell silent. She handed over the phone, her hand shaking slightly. "Yes, Mr. Blake. The CEO wants to speak with you." Jordan picked up the phone and put it to his ear. His voice was deep and calm, echoing evenly in the space where everyone tried to hear every word. "Evelyn, I'm at Gate C-14. Some of your staff just forced me out of the first-class seat I bought because they think someone like me can't sit there. No one saw the other end of the line, but Evelyn Grant's voice was so clear that several people nearby heard it. Oh my God, Jordan, I just saw the live stream. I'm handling it right now. Let me speak to Supervisor Harper." Jordan handed the phone back. Linda's face paled and her hands gripped the edge of the counter. Yes. "Mrs. Grant, I want a 30-minute report. The flight crew is temporarily suspended, and I want Mr. Blake returned to seat 1A immediately." Linda stammered, "Yes, I will do it right away." When she looked up, Jordan's eyes were still calm, as if he had known this outcome all along. "Dr. Cooper," whispered to Alan Wright, "I have never seen power displayed so silently." Alan nodded, replying softly, He doesn't need to shout, because the whole system will have to speak for him. The JetWatcher account updated the new status line. The CEO of Aurora Airways just called the airport directly, demanding that Jordan Blake, the airline's second-largest shareholder, be reinstated. Aurora shares fell more than 1% in just 45 minutes. An Aurora crisis, or justice, in real time. The electronic screen above blinked, then updated Aurora Airways 9A2, rescheduling in progress. Olivia Carter, the one who had started it all, stood still in the distance, her face pale. All eyes were on her, and in a flash she knew that every word she had ever said was being recorded and broadcast across social media. Linda forced a smile and turned to Jordan. "Mr. Blake, we are extremely sorry. This is a misunderstanding." Jordan interrupted softly. "No, Linda, this isn't a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when both sides are wrong. This is prejudice." Those words made her pause. All the sounds in the area seemed to disappear. Only the distant loudspeaker announcement could be heard. "Flight 982. Please wait for further information." Jordan took a deep breath and looked around. His eyes were no longer on the people who had just insulted him, but on everyone, the crowd filming, the people who stood watching, too afraid to speak. "I don't care if I'm a shareholder or a CEO," he said slowly. "I care if I were a regular passenger today, nobody knew my name, no business card. How would this end?" The question made the whole crowd bow their heads. Brooks, the policeman who had checked the ticket, stepped forward, his voice low and apologetic. "Blake, I apologize. I should have spoken up sooner." Jordan nodded. "You did the right thing and kept calm. It's just a pity that, in this system, sometimes calmness is considered resistance." A young woman standing nearby, a regular passenger, raised her hand and asked quietly, "Mr. Blake, are you going to sue them?" He looked at her, his eyes softening. "No, I don't want to sue anyone. I just want them to learn something that money can't buy. Dignity." Linda turned away, her eyes starting to redden. Olivia looked down, her hands clasped together. Evelyn Grant was still on the line, her voice coming through the speakerphone in Linda's hand. "Mr. Blake, on behalf of Aurora Airways, I apologize, and I pledge to take immediate action," Jordan replied, his voice soft but firm. "I believe you, Evelyn, but this time, don't just apologize. Make amends." He handed the phone back to Linda, then slowly turned toward the waiting chair. "Dr. Cooper followed, whispering, "You know, I'm an emergency room doctor, and I've seen people lose their tempers over smaller things. But you choose to stay silent." "Why?" Jordan smiled softly. "Because I know anger can make them fear me, but calm makes them fear themselves." "Doctor..." Cooper was silent. In the distance, JetWatcher's screen flashes again. Aurora Airways has just issued an internal announcement. Flight 982 crew suspended pending investigation. The airline is holding an emergency meeting. Once Aurora fallout. Linda watched Jordan, feeling nothing but disappointment. She realized that in the game of power, there were people who didn't need to raise their voices to make the world listen. Jordan turned around, stopping in the middle of the C-14 lobby, where all eyes were on him. The white light from the airport ceiling cast a long shadow on the tiled floor. He flipped open his phone, put it on speakerphone, and the clear voice of Evelyn Grant, CEO of Aurora Airways, came through the phone. "I'm listening. Jordan, the entire council is in an emergency meeting on this line." Jordan glanced around, then spoke in a low, slow voice, the kind where each word fell like the hammer of justice. "I won't say much. I just want to lay down some facts before we all write this off as a misunderstanding. I've been a platinum customer of Aurora for 6 years. My company, Blake Global Holdings, books over 800 trips a year, spending about $1.2 million on the airline. I'm not saying this to brag, but to remind you that we always choose Aurora because we believe in its value. He paused. The lobby was silent, except for the distant loudspeaker. Aurora Airways apologizes for the delay of Flight 982 to Denver. 6 months ago, Jordan continued, my charity, the Blake Foundation, gave Aurora itself a $500 intolerant grant. The goal, diversity and equity training for frontline staff. His voice was low, his eyes not angry, just a disappointment so deep that it made one look inward. Today, I was removed from the first-class seat that I paid for, just because they thought someone like me couldn't sit there. If a major shareholder, a loyal customer, someone who has contributed to a diversity training program is treated like this. He looked up, looking straight into the phone lens of the dozens of people filming, his voice clearer than ever. How badly would the average person be treated? No one moved. No one said a word. The whole hall seemed frozen in that moment. Linda Harper swallowed. Her eyes filled with guilt and fear. Olivia Carter, who had spoken the first words in this series of mistakes, now looked down, tears streaming down her cheeks. On the other end of the line, CEO Evelyn Grant was silent for a long moment before responding. Jordan, I have no excuse. You are right. This is not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a systemic disease. Jordan gently, I don't need an apology. I need a commitment that the system will change, not for me, but for everyone who might end up like me. The crowd remained silent, but this silence was no longer indifference, but bowed heads. A few placed their hands on their hearts, as if they had just witnessed something deeper than justice, a lesson in dignity. Alan Wright spoke first, Mr. Blake. I've been flying first class for 20 years. I've never seen anyone speak as calmly as you. And frankly, I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner. Jordan smiled softly. It's okay. Alan, sometimes justice doesn't need someone to shout. It just needs someone to stand still long enough for the truth to speak. Dr. Helen Cooper nodded, her eyes sparkling. And you just did it. For so many who couldn't. Jordan turned back, looked at Linda, his voice no longer reproachful, only decisive, Linda. I don't want you to lose your job, but I want you to understand. What will bring Aurora down is not the people who are wrong, but the people who know they are wrong but remain silent. She bowed her head and softly replied, I understand, Mr. Blake, and I will not be silent any longer. On the other end of the line, Evelyn Grant's voice rang out, firmer than before Jordan. I will convene the council today. We will not let this end with an apology. I promise. Jordan nodded slightly. Thanks, Evelyn, but this time, don't apologize for your employees. Change the process that makes them that way. Everyone looked at each other. A few people started clapping, slowly at first, then faster. The applause spread like a wave across the hall. The Jet Watcher account updated Jordan Blake just spoke to Aurora CEO on the phone. Straight, calm, and without anger. Hall C.R.N. was silent. Aurora awakening, justice without anger. Within minutes, major news outlets began sharing the video. On Twitter, the hashtag Aurora Bias was replaced by Aurora Change. The story was no longer a scandal, but a moment of awakening. Jordan stood there, unsmiling, unconquerable. He just looked out the window, where the sunset reflected off the tile floor. I flew Aurora for 6 years because I believed that justice and humanity could coexist in first class. Today, I want to believe that's still true." An amateur cameraman approached and asked Mr. Blake, "Do you have anything to say to everyone watching?" Jordan replied softly, "Just one thing. When someone insults you, don't shout to be heard. Sometimes, just stand still. Let them hear your silence." The hall was silent. In the dim light, Jordan walked slowly towards seat 1A, the place he should never have left. And when he sat down, no one said anything. But somewhere, in the silence, everyone understood. Justice had just been served, not by force, but by dignity. He fastened his seatbelt, his eyes still looking out the window at the drifting clouds. A voice came over the intercom. Evelyn Grant, CEO of Aurora Airways. Her voice was clear, with a tone that was both urgent and restrained Jordan. "The board is listening to this call. If you have any requests, please speak up. We won't let this happen again." Jordan raised his head, looking around the cabin, where dozens of eyes were still watching him, no longer with curiosity, but with respect. He nodded slightly, then said slowly, "I'll be brief. Evelyn, I don't need a public apology. I need action." The whole cabin was quiet. "Dr." Helen Cooper sat in seat 1B and leaned slightly, her eyes lighting up as she heard his voice continue. "First, I would like to immediately terminate the individuals who have demonstrated discriminatory behavior. This includes Olivia Carter, a flight attendant, and Captain Daniel Hughes, a captain. Supervisor Linda Harper. I am recommending disciplinary action, not because she made the decision, but because she did not have the courage to correct the mistake when she could have." Linda sat in the front row, her head bowed slightly. No one objected. Jordan paused, then continued, his voice even as if he were reading a strategy report. But each word that fell carried the weight of dignity. Second, within 30 days, all frontline employees, flight attendants, managers, security, gate staff must complete unconscious bias training. It's not a moral lesson, but a first step in learning to see people as human beings, not through the yardstick of prejudice. He looked at Dr. Cooper and smiled slightly. She nodded, her eyes shining with deep sympathy. "Third," he continued, "I want to establish an anonymous reporting system run by a third party, so that every employee can report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Justice cannot exist if the truth is not allowed to speak." Everyone in the cabin watched. In the distance, a jet watcher was still live streaming. Text scrolling across the screen. Jordan Blake is calling for system-wide reform in Aurora, not just justice for himself. Aurora change, torch justice, without anger. Jordan took a thin file from his briefcase and turned to the next page. Fourth, I'm calling for the creation of an Aurora Diversity and Inclusion Fund, $500,000 coming from the company's own coffers, not the Blake Foundation. I want to see Aurora invest in real change, not rely on other people's money to patch things up. Captain Hughes, still standing by the cabin door, bowed his head. For the first time, he understood what the weight of truth meant. Jordan took a deep breath, closed the file, and looked straight at the phone camera, where countless people were watching live. And finally, I want Aurora Airways to issue a public apology, not for me, but for all the passengers who have been misjudged, who have been treated unfairly, simply because they don't look like the person who has the right to sit in the front row. His voice slowed down. Low and steady, I want them to admit systemic wrongdoing, not shy away from it with the phrase personal misunderstanding. They need to call this problem for what it is: racism in the service. The first-class cabin was as silent as a church. Evelyn Grant was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice heavy with weight, "Jordan, what you're asking for, I don't think it's too much. But I need to know your time limit," Jordan replied without hesitation. 72 hours. If there is no action within the next 72 hours, Blake Global Holdings will begin the process of divesting Aurora Airways, and I will recommend that all of my partners stop prioritizing Aurora in all transportation categories. Linda was startled. Her eyes filled with panic. She understood. If that happened, thousands of people would be affected. The stock would plummet, and Aurora's reputation would be ruined. Evelyn Grant took a deep breath. "You said 72 hours?" "Yes," Jordan replied. 3 days enough time for people to choose between change and collapse. There was a long silence. Then from the other end of the line, the CEO's voice rang out. "Firmly, I understand. I will sign the deployment order today." The cabin fell silent. Not cheers, not applause, but a gust of respect, the kind reserved for those who dare to turn insult into meaningful action. "Doctor," Cooper put his hand on Jordan's shoulder and whispered, you just gave justice a shape, not by the court, but by reason." Jordan smiled softly. "Justice does not need to be shouted. It just needs to be remembered." On the JetWatcher screen, a new message appears. Aurora Airways officially agrees to Jordan Blake's 5 demands. Deadline 72 hours. Aurora reform, our dignity in action. Aurora stock halted trading. The press began to rush in, but Jordan said nothing more. He just leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The pale yellow light from the window illuminated his face calm, and powerful enough to make the system self-reflect. While the first-class cabin remained silent, on the other end of the line, Evelyn Grant, CEO of Aurora Airways, was meeting with the board of directors via emergency link. The screen displayed a row of solemn faces, but no one spoke before she spoke. "Gentlemen, this is no longer a media crisis. This is a test of Aurora's ethics and future." A CFO lowered his voice. "Evelyn, he's not asking for compensation, but if we don't do it, all of Blake Global's partners will pull out. That's more than this quarter's revenue." Evelyn looked up at the camera. She had worked in the airline industry for 30 years, seen her fair share of media scandals, but she had never seen a man shake the system just by keeping his cool. "He doesn't want revenge," she said softly. "He's teaching us a lesson." Back on the open line with Jordan, Evelyn spoke clearly. "Mr. Blake, on behalf of Aurora Airways, I hereby formally accept all the conditions you have presented to the board and passengers. Implementation will begin tonight, and you have full independent oversight." The clacking of keyboards echoed from the legal team. A lawyer whispered into her headset, "We need to sign the executive bonus adjustment addendum." "Ma'am." Evelyn turned back to Jordan, her voice low. "Do you have any other requests?" Jordan opened his eyes, calmly looking straight at the screen showing her image, the face of a powerful woman trembling because of a collective mistake. He replied, "There is one more thing." She tilted her head slightly. "Waiting. From now on, 20% of the bonuses of the entire Aurora Airways Executive Board will be linked to Fair Treatment Index and internal discrimination reports. If the system still complains of discrimination, their own wallets will suffer the consequences." A director sitting next to Evelyn jumped up. "Mr. Blake, that doesn't make sense." Jordan did not interrupt, just continued speaking softly, his voice calm but decisive. "It is not fair that people are rewarded for cutting costs, without being held accountable for how they treat people. If there is to be true fairness, justice must have a price. The sentence was like a cold knife, cutting through the air. Evelyn closed her eyes for a few seconds, then nodded. Okay, I'll put that clause in right away, and I'll sign first. Jordan smiled slightly. Thank you. Mrs. Grant, today, you have demonstrated that leadership is not just about sitting at the top. It is about knowing when to bow down. Outside the cabin, the passengers had yet to leave. Everyone watched in silence as what seemed like a scene straight out of a movie, a black CEO, sitting in first class, redefining the meaning of class. Dr. Helen Cooper whispered to Alan Wright, "You see, with just a few words, he made the entire executive board bow their heads." Alan nodded slightly. He didn't play on reputation. He played on what they feared most, money. Linda Harper, who had confronted Jordan at gate C-14, remained seated in her seat. Her eyes filled with tears. She muttered, "I have never seen anyone use insults as a tool to change an entire system like that." Jordan adjusted his collar, his voice booming over the intercoms. The meeting ended. Thank you all passengers for watching. None of you have to choose sides. You just have to choose correctly. The cabin remained silent, but a sense of change pervaded. It was no longer a scandal of one airline, but a warning to the entire industry. When justice comes from the silent, it can sweep away even the most proud heights. Jet Watcher Update Evelyn Grant officially signs off on Jordan Blake's 5 terms. PLU, new 20% executive bonus contingent on equity metrics, Aurora stock suspended, but company reputation saved by unprecedented transparency. Aurora reform, justice in numbers. Evelyn left the conference room, her head in her hands. A reporter asked quickly as she walked down the hall, "Mrs. Grant, do you think you were just forced?" She stopped, looked straight into the lens, her voice calm. "No. I think I was just reminded fairness is not a negotiation. It is a foundation." Back on the plane, Jordan looked out the window. The light outside was fading, reflecting on the glass the image of clouds tinting the sunset. He spoke softly, as if talking to himself. Justice does not need someone to shout to be heard. It only needs someone to say the right thing at the right time. Doctor. Cooper leaned over. "Do you regret not reacting more strongly?" Jordan chuckled. "No, because anger can silence people, but intelligence, it changes them." The plane prepared to take off again. The passengers looked silently at the black man in seat 1A. No one applauded, no one cheered, but in each of them there was a silent respect, a silent justice that they would talk about forever. When the internal announcement came on, the female pilot's voice was clear, deep and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, Aurora Flight 982 to Denver will depart shortly. Thank you for your patience. Let us begin again, with respect for one another." The first-class cabin was completely transformed. The new crew came in, neat and composed. Olivia Carter, who had started the storm, was escorted to the internal area to work with the Human Resources Department. Captain Hughes, the captain, was also suspended for the day. No one talked, no one laughed, because everyone understood. This was not a punishment, but a reminder every act of disrespect has its price. Jordan Blake sat back in seat 1A, the seat he should never have been forced to leave. He looked around the cabin, a small smile on his face. Beside him, Dr. Helen Cooper smiled back, her eyes warming, as if witnessing something beyond justice, real change. "A little late," Jordan said evenly, "but worth it, because we just made them change their ways." The cabin was silent. His words echoed like a stream of thought, slowly permeating each person. In Aurora Operations Center, an urgent email was sent to more than 12,000 employees worldwide. The subject line, Dignity on Board. The message from CEO Evelyn Grant was just 3 lines. From today, Aurora does more than just transport people. We transport a belief that everyone deserves equal respect. This is not a media campaign. This is a commitment. Online. The news was constant. Images of Jordan Blake sitting calmly in seat 1A were all over Twitter and the evening news. Headlines were everywhere. A black man changes Aurora Airways from the inside. 1 passenger. 1 action. The whole system must reflect on itself. The Dignity On Board campaign, Lessons from Silent Justice. Jet Watcher, the account that live-streamed the incident, posted the last line of the day. Aurora 982 departed 47 minutes late, but arrived a generation early. The tweet was shared hundreds of thousands of times within hours. On the plane, Mr. Alan Wright leaned over and whispered to Jordan, "You know, I used to think power was the ability to give orders. But today, you made me understand. True power is when people still listen to you, even when you only speak softly." Jordan replied softly, "They don't hear me, Alan. They hear justice spoken through me." The cabin lights dimmed, a dim light illuminating his face. The plane began to taxi down the runway. A light breeze blew, carrying the sound of the engines, the sound of a new beginning. On the small screen in front of the seat, an internal message appears. Operation Dignity On Board is live. 30 days of global training. Starting on Flight 982. A young passenger sitting in the back cabin read the inscription, turned slightly to his friend, and whispered, "Who do you think started it?" The other replied, "A man in seat 1A. Jordan closed his eyes slightly. The engine hummed steadily. No one knew what he was thinking. But Cooper sensed it. He was not seeking victory, but ordered the order of justice. When the plane reached a stable altitude, a new flight attendant arrived and gently placed a cup of black coffee on the table in front of him. "Thank you for making us look at our work," she said, her voice trembling. Jordan looked at her and nodded. "It wasn't me. You chose to look at it. Outside, the sky stretched blue. Below were rolling clouds, white and thick. It looked as if the world were being washed clean." At Aurora headquarters, Evelyn Grant had just finished a brief press conference. She told the media, "We were wrong, but more importantly, we are correcting it. And we are fortunate to have customers like Jordan Blake, who remind us that respect is not a rule, it is a foundation." Major newspapers reprinted the statement. Aurora shares, after falling more than 1%, rebounded in the afternoon session. A financial expert commented on CNBC, "Perhaps for the first time, moral values have been calculated into dividends." Jordan opened his phone and saw a new notification from Blake Global Holdings. "Internal team." His assistant texted Mr. Blake, "The press is calling you the man who made the aviation industry look at itself." He replied simply, "I just made them stop long enough to hear the truth." The plane began to descend. Through the window, Denver appeared in the afternoon sun. The distant mountains were covered with a thin layer of snow. Jordan looked down, his eyes calm. He knew that this flight was taking him not just to a city, but also to a new era of aviation where dignity became the standard of service. When the plane touched down, the passengers stood up, but no one was in a hurry. A middle-aged white woman approached and gently took Jordan's hand. "Thank you for not being angry. Because of that, I learned something I never understood in my whole life. Respect does not come from fear, but from understanding. Jordan smiled and replied softly, "We just need to remember that justice is not to win anyone, but to save our own souls." The plane stopped. The cabin door opened. The last golden sunlight poured in, illuminating the face of the black man who had just changed the system with his silent voice. 3 days later, at Aurora Airways headquarters, the atmosphere was different. There was no more social laughter or idle chatter in the hallways. People walked faster, more quietly, as if walking through a new page of their own company's history. The clock on the wall in the central conference room read exactly 9:00. Mum. Evelyn Grant, CEO of Aurora, signed a file that was more than 40 pages thick. The document was titled Aurora Incident Reform, Post-Flight 982 Reform Implementation Report. The first line is in bold. Justice comes not from punishing, but from correcting. Below, the administrative order is sent system-wide. Olivia Carter, former chief flight attendant, was fired immediately. Captain Daniel Hughes, captain, indefinitely suspended and barred from holding a human resources management position. Ming. Supervisor Linda Harper, demoted to training coordinator, required to complete empathy and bias awareness program in the next 6 months. The report was accompanied by a note from Evelyn Grant. Every decision is considered not for public opinion, but for the ethical standards that Aurora chooses from today. That same morning, a new document titled Dignity Onboard Training Module was uploaded to the internal system. Nearly 12,000 employees received an email notification. All frontline workers, regardless of position or seniority, must complete bias and emotion training by the 15th of next month. A small note at the end of the email made many people stop and read carefully. This is a program independently supervised by the Blake Foundation. At the Blake Global Holdings office, Jordan sat in front of the glass door, his coffee slowly cooling in his hand. He didn't smile, just looked out into the distance, where the sunlight reflected off the buildings on the glass. His assistant, Maya, walked in and placed the iPad on the table. "Mr. Blake, this is official communication from Aurora. All your terms have been executed in 72 hours. Jordan just nodded slightly, his voice warm. "Thank you. So at least this time, the words won't go unnoticed." Maya hesitated a bit, then asked, "Would you like to issue a response statement?" Jordan shook his head. "No need. They did the right thing. As for me, I was just doing my job." Meanwhile, media across America was abuzz with news of the Aurora incident reform. The Washington Post ran the headline, "One slip-up has sent a moral shockwave through the airline industry." CNN broadcast a special news report. The reporter said to the camera, "In just 72 hours, Aurora Airways turned crisis into reform. They not only fired the individuals who had committed wrongdoing, but also restructured the entire service culture of the airline." On television, Jordan Blake was shown, sitting in seat 1A, his eyes calm, with the following comment, "A man who doesn't shout, doesn't get angry, but makes the whole system change." On social media, the hashtag #DishAuroraIncidentReform trended for 2 days in a row. But the most surprising thing wasn't the public reaction. It was the reaction from other airlines. Skyworld Airlines posted a statement. "We voluntarily implement an internal behavioral bias assessment program." United Star Air announced it would adopt an anonymous reporting mechanism, similar to Aurora's. A week later, the U.S. Department of Transportation DAT sent a letter requiring airlines to publicly disclose the number of racial discrimination complaints in the past 12 months. Evelyn Grant watched the news in the small conference room. when the reporter mentioned the phrase Aurora Incident Reform. She smiled wearily, but with relief. We started something, not just for Aurora, she told the board, but for the industry. A human resources manager asked softly, "Do you think Jordan Blake will be satisfied?" Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm. I don't think he ever needed satisfaction. He just wanted to see real change. That afternoon, Linda Harper walked into the training room, where she was now just another student. On the board was written, "Bias is not hatred, it's blindness." Linda sat down and opened her notebook. The first thing she wrote was, "I used to believe I was just doing my job. It turns out my silence was the most dangerous part." At the same time, Olivia Carter, a former flight attendant, left the Aurora headquarters. She stood outside the door, looking at the building where she had worked for nearly 8 years. In her hand was an envelope containing her termination letter and a letter inviting her to a retraining program. She looked down and sighed, no longer angry, just empty. A reporter approached and asked, "Do you have anything to say?" Olivia. She was silent for a few seconds, then replied softly, "I think I need to relearn how to look at others, with eyes free of prejudice." The quote was replayed on a television show the following night, and the viewers, mostly older people, nodded silently. Back in Jordan, he sat in his office, watching the news. His eyes held a mixture of sadness and relief. He spoke softly, as if to himself, 72 hours. Enough time for an airline to change. The world will probably need more. He picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's number. When she answered, his voice was calm as ever. "Thank you, ma'am, for keeping your word." Evelyn smiled and replied softly, "No, Jordan. Thank you, sir, for holding us to your word." Outside the window, the afternoon sky was a clear blue. An airplane bearing the Aurora Airways logo had just taken off, leaving a long white trail of smoke in the sky, like a promise written in light. 3 weeks later, at the Blake Foundation office, the mail began pouring in more than ever. There were handwritten letters, emails that were pages long, and messages from all over the country. People told their own stories of being misjudged because of their skin color, their accent, or because they didn't look like someone in power. Jordan's assistant brought in a thick stack of letters and whispered, "Mr. Blake, hundreds of people have written to us. They say the Aurora incident makes them feel less alone." Jordan took out a cream-colored envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter written in childish handwriting. "Dear Mr. Blake, I'm Angela Thompson, 26 from Atlanta. Last year, I was pulled off a flight by another airline simply because they didn't believe my ticket was real. I cried, but no one listened, no video, no hashtag, just me and my shame. But when I watched your clip, I understood. Silence does not mean weakness. It can be the beginning of change. I contacted a human rights organization. They said I could turn my story into a class action lawsuit, so that others who have suffered like me will not be forgotten. Thank you for giving me courage." Jordan read the letter slowly, then put it down on the table. The afternoon light coming through the window illuminated his face, calm but thoughtful. He said softly, as if talking to himself, "From a disgrace to a model of reform. That is the true power of justice." In the following days, the Blake Foundation, in collaboration with Human Equity Watch, opened a portal to receive complaints of discrimination in the transport industry. In just 1 month, more than 2,000 cases were recorded, mostly on airlines, but also on high-speed trains, buses, and even technology taxis. Angela Thompson's story quickly went viral. The young black woman who had been mistreated on a budget airline flight became the voice of hundreds. In an interview, she spoke slowly, her eyes shining with determination. If someone like Mr. Blake, a successful CEO, can be publicly humiliated, how much more do ordinary people like us have to suffer in silence? Now no one has to be silent anymore. The news reached the U.S. Department of Transportation DOT. A closed-door meeting was held in Washington, attended by aviation leaders, civil rights lawyers, and representatives of the Blake Foundation. Jordan did not say much. He only presented a thick document, which listed the discrimination reported after the Aurora incident. Justice is not a moral issue. He told the committee, it is a data issue. If you cannot measure injustice, you cannot fix it. 4 months later, the Department of Transportation officially issued a new set of guidelines for the entire transportation industry, called Aurora Rules. The most prominent provision requires all airlines, trains, and public transport operators to compile and publicly disclose the number of complaints related to discrimination, quarterly by region, and by employee position. The press calls it the Aurora Incident Reform Act, but the people call it more simply Jordan's Law. The New York Times editorialized from an online video. America was forced to re-examine how it treats its people, not with slogans, but with regulations, not with anger, but with action. During a live broadcast, the host asked Jordan, "Do you think you won?" He smiled lightly and shook his head. "I don't win against anyone. I just help people overcome their own prejudices." A week later, Jordan received a call from Angela Thompson. Her voice was shaky, but full of pride. "Mr. Blake, our case was accepted by the court. It will pave the way for hundreds of others. I no longer feel small," Jordan replied, his voice as soft as a blessing Angela. Sometimes change begins with one person telling the story, so the world doesn't repeat it. She was silent for a moment and then said softly, "Thank you. I just learned from you." They both laughed. Outside Jordan's office window, an Aurora plane flew by, the sunlight catching the newly painted logo, which read, "Aurora Airways, Flying with Dignity." On social media, a jet watcher posted the final tweet about the incident that shook the industry from a humiliating video. Jordan Blake turned it into a movement for reform. Justice doesn't bring anyone down, it lifts everyone up. At 55, Jordan Blake is no longer a symbol of wealth, but a symbol of quiet wisdom, someone who has proven that justice does not require gunfire, but only a person calm enough to stand still when the world is stormy. In the 2 years since the Aurora incident, America has changed a lot. Airlines, subway systems, even banks and supermarkets display in small print the following internal policy: no bias zone. But what Jordan remembers most is not the signs, but the people who have changed or been changed. That September, he was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Transportation Equality Summit in Memphis, Tennessee. The large hall was packed with nearly 800 attendees, from airline executives, government representatives, to people like him who had been discriminated against. Jordan stood on stage, his voice calm, warm and deep, with the timbre of someone who had walked through a storm without losing his kindness. Justice should not end with someone being fired. It truly begins when someone understands why they were wrong and chooses not to be wrong again. The whole room was silent, except for the sound of pens scribbling and cameras taking pictures. He added, without any dogma, "If I had been angry that day, Aurora would have lost a passenger, not an opportunity to learn. But sometimes, what we need to teach the world is not a lesson about power, but about dignity. He stopped, intending to end his speech, when from the back row, a female voice rang out, trembling but clear. "Mr. Blake." Jordan looked down. A woman stepped out of the audience, thinner than before, with short hair, bright but unassuming eyes. The hall stirred. It was instantly recognizable Olivia Carter. She held the microphone, her voice slow and full of emotion. "I never thought I would be standing here, before you, and before everyone." Jordan was silent, his eyes only blinking slightly, not angry, not cold. Olivia took a deep breath and continued. "I was the flight attendant who made Flight 982 go down in history because of my own mistake. When I was fired, I thought my life was over. But it turned out it was just beginning." The whole room was silent. Olivia said, "After leaving Aurora, I enrolled in a diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI program. At first, I was just doing it to get a degree so I can get a job. But the more I learned, the scariest thing I realized, that I had a bias without even knowing it." She stopped and looked at Jordan. I didn't see a successful businessman, a legitimate passenger, or even a normal human being. I just saw the color of his skin. And in that moment, I became a living example of what society needs to fix the most. Jordan nodded slightly, his eyes no longer filled with reproach. Olivia continued, "I spent 2 years learning, re-educating myself. Now I work as a consultant for businesses, helping them uncover hidden biases in their hiring, customer service, and evaluation processes. I do this not to atone for my mistakes, but to make sure no one else makes the same mistakes I did." She bowed her head. Her voice choked. "I apologize, Mr. Blake. Not because I offended you, but because I contributed to damaging something larger, the trust between people." A silence fell over the auditorium. Then Jordan stepped off the stage. He walked slowly toward her, saying nothing, just holding out his hand. Olivia took it, a long, wordless handshake, but one that held forgiveness and new beginnings. The entire auditorium stood up, applause thundering, not for victory, but for witnessing a truly transformative moment. A reporter asked immediately after Mr. Blake, "What do you think when you see Miss Carter come back? A changed person?" Jordan smiled and replied softly, "Justice is never about hatred. It is about giving people the chance to find their inner light." The next day, the Washington Post ran a photo of the moment. On its front page, Jordan Blake shaking hands with Olivia Carter at the Transportation Equity Conference. The headline read, "The Aurora incident ends, not with punishment, but with awakening." The story went viral on social media. One Twitter user commented, "It's strange. She used to humiliate him in front of hundreds of people, and today he helps her stand up in front of thousands." Another person replied, "That's what we forget. Justice is not about revenge, but about healing." After the conference, Jordan sat in the Memphis airport lounge, looking out the window. An Aurora-branded plane was preparing to take off. He saw young flight attendants greeting passengers, smiling at each passenger, no matter who. Over the loudspeaker, a familiar voice rang out, deep and confident. "Dear passengers on Aurora Flight 612, we are pleased to serve you today." Jordan chuckled. It was Linda Harper, now head of customer experience training. He leaned back in his chair and said softly to himself, "Everything is back on track. Not because of me, but because they chose to grow up." As the plane took off, he closed his eyes. Somewhere among the clouds, justice smiled, no longer as thunder, but as a gentle breeze. 3 months later, on a small PBS talk show, Jordan Blake appeared again, not as an Aurora hero, but as a special guest talking about the power of calm in angry times. The audience in the auditorium was largely made up of older people, people who have witnessed social upheaval over the past half-century, and understand that sometimes real change doesn't begin with a shout, but with purposeful patience. The host asked Mr. Blake, "If you could go back on that flight, would you do anything differently?" Jordan smiled, lightly but deeply. "No, I would still sit still. I would still hand over my ticket, and I would still turn on my camera, not to attract attention, but to document the truth." He paused, then said slowly, "It's easy to get angry. Anyone can do it. But if you stop at anger, you only win an argument, not the system." In the audience, many people nodded. An old lady with white hair stood up, her voice trembling. "I lived through Rosa Parks. She just refused to give up her seat, and the whole country changed. You remind me of that." Jordan smiled gently. "I dare not compare. Madam, I just believe that there are revolutions that do not need shouting. They need to be recorded, proven, and forced to face their own data." He recounted that in the moment Olivia and Captain Hughes pulled him off his chair. He felt clearly if he lost his temper, everyone would see only a black man causing trouble. But if he kept his cool, turned things around, and forced them to talk in terms of law, in terms of terms and numbers, then the whole world would have to listen. "I don't choose to argue," he said. "I choose to acknowledge. I don't choose to blow up. I choose to prove, because only prove outlasts emotion." That's why he quoted Aurora's shareholder articles right in the middle of Gate C-14 in front of hundreds of people. Not to threaten them, but to remind them, ethics and financial benefits do not go hand in hand. When ethics are tied to reputation and money, businesses will be forced to listen. Jordan said, his voice low, his eyes distant. "I have seen many people who are right, but alone, because they are angry instead of taking action. The world is not changed by anger, but by those who are patient enough to turn anger into mechanism." A reporter asked, "What exactly is the mechanism you speak of?" Jordan smiled, took a sip of water, and replied, "Mechanism is when you force people to rewrite the rules, not just apologize, but change the employee handbook, not just do communications, but reset the reward and punishment structure. And most importantly, everything has to be documented." He paused for a moment, then said as if sending a message to the next generation, "When you see something wrong, don't just say it, write it down. Don't just post a status, document it. Documentation is the only way to keep the truth from being distorted by emotion or power." The audience was silent. The host did not interrupt. The camera zoomed in slowly on his face. The light fell on his deep eyes, which were both exhausted from humiliation and at the same time peaceful from victory without fighting. Jordan added that, after Aurora, dozens of companies contacted the Blake Foundation to learn how to translate ethical values into financial commitments, that is, embedding social responsibility into salaries, dividends, and investment contracts. "When kindness is linked to benefit," he said, "it lasts longer than when it is based solely on emotion." The discussion ended with a long applause. A young student approached him and asked, "Are you afraid that your approach is too cold? Like instead of fighting with your heart, you use an Excel spreadsheet?" Jordan laughed. "You know, the heart doesn't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes it just needs to be recorded properly, and the system will have to answer." He put his hand on the student's shoulder. "If one person gets angry, they can scare others. But if they are calm and steady, They make the whole system look at itself. On the way to the parking lot, it was dusk. Jordan saw a group of young people holding a banner outside the building. Equality needs structure, not slogans. He smiled, slowed down, then took a picture and sent it to Maya, his assistant. "See?" He texted, "Things are changing. Not because we shout louder, but because we learn to keep our voices from dying." That night, Jordan sat alone in his Denver apartment. On his desk, his laptop was open to a news page with the headline, "Aurora Airways Honored for Leading DEI Reform in the Airline Industry." He took a sip of tea, then opened the old notes file. The last line he added was, "Don't just get angry. Leave a trail. Document it. Demand mechanism." He added a small line below. "As a message to the next generation, justice does not need noise. It needs memory." Outside the window, the Denver night was quiet. An Aurora plane flew by, its red and white lights flashing in the sky. Jordan watched, his eyes shining with faith. He knew that as long as there were people who dared to record the truth, the world still had a chance to become more just. And perhaps that very moment is how justice chose to end its story, not with applause, but with a silent lesson that reaches every level of society. From a seemingly small act, a flight attendant's suspicious look at a plainclothed black man, the world witnessed how prejudice can manifest, spread, and be defeated. On an emotional level, it was a public humiliation. Jordan didn't need to shout, didn't need to respond, but everyone on Flight 982 felt the chill of injustice in the air. When a person is disrespected not for his actions, but for his appearance, his silence, in that moment, spoke louder than any excuse. At the social level, what makes the story go beyond the incident is the courage of the witnesses. Dr. Helen Cooper, a white emergency room doctor, and businessman Alan Wright. They were not insiders, but they chose to be on the right side. They didn't need to shout slogans. They just told the truth. He did nothing wrong. That statement transformed the incident from troublemaker to a flawed system showing itself. Their voices are a mirror of common sense, that justice is not a racial privilege, but a universal human obligation. When white people dare to speak up for black people who have been wronged, society begins to move, even if only an inch. But that first inch is necessary to change the trajectory of the system. Then came the power floor, where everything changed in a matter of minutes. The person who was suspected, who was humiliated, who was asked to leave his seat, turned out to be the one with the power to decide the fate of the entire airline. When the business card, Jordan Blake, CEO, Blake Global Holdings, was placed on the table, every face on that flight froze. The truth did not need to be shouted. It just needed to appear at the right time. But Jordan didn't use his power for revenge. He didn't fire anyone with a phone call. He didn't threaten with a title. He just let the system prove itself wrong and forced it to correct itself. It was that calmness that made the world rethink the concept of power. True power is not about making people afraid, but about making them change without being forced. And finally, at the institutional level, Jordan turned a humiliating experience into the beginning of the biggest reform of the American airline industry in a decade. From Aurora's Dignity Onboard campaign to the Department of Transportation's Aurora Rules, it all started with one man's silence in the face of an insult. Justice, then, is no longer about one person being wronged. It becomes about a society learning to see its own wrongs. Aurora doesn't just fire a few people. It changes the rules, attaching fairness to executive bonuses. When morality is tied to profit, the system learns to fear. Since then, A slew of other companies have followed suit. Airlines, cruise lines, banks, all publish data on discrimination. Not because they're suddenly better, but because they understand that justice is no longer just a moral issue, but a matter of survival. Jordan Blake's story became iconic for the era of silent justice. There were no spectacular revenges, no enemies destroyed, only people awakened. A veteran journalist for The Atlantic wrote the Aurora incident did not end when Jordan Blake returned to 1A. It truly began when he chose not to be angry and let the world be angry for him. Since then, law and business schools have begun to incorporate the case into their curricula, calling it the Blake paradigm, a model for resolving conflicts between individual dignity and power structures. They teach students that in a modern society, smart people do not win by volume, but by the system they use to force others to change. That evening, after the talk show, Jordan returned to his small apartment in Denver. The sunset streamed through the windows, reflecting off a plaque on the wall, Aurora Reform Award for changing social consciousness. He sat down and played the old video. Olivia Carter coming forward to apologize at the Memphis conference. He watched it not out of pride, but to remind himself that every fight for justice is worth it when it ends in healing. Jordan said softly, his voice low and warm, "It all begins with a wrong look, but ends with a right world." A gentle breeze blew, the curtain swaying slightly. Outside, the Aurora plane took off, its lights reflecting red in the night sky. Jordan watched, his eyes no longer sad, only the calm of someone who understood that sometimes justice does not come from making someone pay, but from letting everyone grow up together. The story of Jordan Blake, a black man denied first class despite having a valid ticket, is more than just a small in-flight tragedy. It's a mirror of modern society. It reminds us that prejudice doesn't always take a violent form. Sometimes it's just a suspicious look, a seemingly innocent remark that can shatter a person's dignity. Jordan did not choose to get angry, did not respond with a shout. He chose rational silence to acknowledge, to testify, and to force the system to examine itself. From a seemingly small act, he changed the entire American aviation industry, making the world understand that true justice does not require shouting. It just requires being steadfast enough to stand still. The message applies to each of us when offended. Don't let anger guide you. Let wisdom and calm be your strongest response. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be held and demonstrated. If you believe that justice begins small, that humanity and dignity are still the foundation of a decent society, please help spread this story. Like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to join us in telling stories of wisdom, respect, and silent justice, where good people don't need to shout to be heard, and the truth always speaks for itself.